Belarus is unlikely to become directly involved in Russia's war against Ukraine in the near future, as such a move could significantly destabilize the country's internal political landscape and threaten Alexander Lukashenko's hold on power, according to the Bureau for the Protection of the Constitution. In its latest annual report, Bureau for the Protection of the Constitution assessed that Lukashenko's regime remains stable primarily due to the repression and restrictions on freedom of speech. Meanwhile, Belarus is becoming increasingly dependent on Russia, with Moscow's influence on the country continuing to grow. Russian interests continue to dominate the country's foreign policy. Minsk continues to look for new cooperation partners and markets for Belarusian goods. Many of Russia's instruments of influence in Belarus will likely persist even after the departure of Lukashenko and Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. The parliamentary and presidential elections in 2024 and 2025 showed that the regime still controls the situation in Belarus. In 2024, Belarusian security forces escalated repression against opposition figures and their relatives. Despite this, the opposition remained active last year, though interest in democratic movements remained low for various reasons. For example, any involvement in such activities is considered personally dangerous and can lead to several years in prison, the report says. Russia also intensified efforts last year to further integrate Belarus into a unified state structure. Latvian counterintelligence assesses that Belarus is unlikely to directly join Russia's war against Ukraine in the near future, as doing so could destabilize the country politically and weaken Lukashenko's position, particularly amid strong public opposition to the Belarusian military's involvement in combat. Lukashenko's cooperation with the Kremlin serves as a guarantee of his presidential powers, enabling him to maintain power and ensure the stability of his regime. However, the Belarusian leader is aware that such support jeopardizes his ability to continue to lead the country, so Lukashenko is increasingly concerned about the need to reduce Belarus's isolation from the West in order to balance Russian influence, the report says. Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya stated that Belarusians show little support for the country's involvement in hostilities against Ukraine, and therefore it is unlikely to occur.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Tuesday said that Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly expressed readiness for peace talks, and noted that a comprehensive settlement, a long-term settlement, a viable settlement of the conflict in Ukraine is impossible without a comprehensive consideration of security issues in Europe. Asked whether the Kremlin would agree to Ukraine's accession to the EU, he said that it is the sovereign right of any country. According to Associated Press, his comments come as senior officials from Russia and the US met in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to begin talks on improving ties and negotiating an end to the fighting in Ukraine. Delegations led by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met at the Darya Palace in Riyadh. The meeting marks another pivotal step by the Trump administration to reverse U.S. policy on isolating Russia and is meant to pave the way for a meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ukrainian officials aren't taking part in the meeting, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Monday that his country won't accept the outcome if Kyiv doesn't take part.
Путин сам неоднократно говорил, что при необходимости он будет готов вести переговоры и с Зеленским. Вместе с тем юридическая фиксация договоренностей подлежит серьезному обсуждению с учетом реальности, говорящей о возможности оспаривать легитимность самого Зеленского. Тоже об этом неоднократно звучали заявления Путина. Что касается архитектуры безопасности в Европе, то, конечно, комплексное урегулирование, долгосрочное урегулирование, жизнеспособное урегулирование невозможно без комплексного рассмотрения вопросов безопасности на континенте. Да, это суверенное право любой страны. Речь идет об интеграционных, об экономических интеграционных процессах. И здесь, конечно же, никто не может ничего диктовать какой-то стране, и не собираемся этого делать. Но совсем другая позиция, конечно, по вопросам, связанных с безопасностью, связанных с оборонными или военными альянсами. Там уже у нас подход другой, и он всем хорошо известен.
Ukraine will not participate in talks this week between the United States officials and Russia on ending the war, Ukrainian President Zelensky said Monday. According to Associated Press, he also said Ukraine will not accept the terms without their participation. Speaking to journalists on a conference call from the United Arab Emirates, Zelensky said, "Ukraine is not participating. Ukraine knew nothing about it. Ukraine regards any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine as negotiations with no result. And we cannot acknowledge anything, any arrangements about us, that were made without us." Zelensky said he would travel to Turkey on Monday and to Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, but that his trip to the Arab nation was unrelated to planned US-Russia talks there on Tuesday. Zelensky said Ukraine wants to sign an agreement on allowing the US access to Ukrainian rare earth minerals, but that a proposal issued by the Trump administration on such access required a more detailed framework for providing Ukraine with security guarantees in exchange. "The question is not about what Ukraine can give, but about what Ukraine can receive," he said. "I told President Trump that we want to sign an agreement. But when it came to the details, there were no security guarantees. We understand that this is just a memorandum for now and that there will be another thorough document with details," he continued, adding that he had agreed with Vice President J.D. Vance that the plan required firmer language and not just an outline of intentions. Zelensky said opening up his country's mineral resources to the U.S. would have to accompany a written agreement on security guarantees for Ukraine. "What exactly does the United States of America provide as a security guarantee?" he said. "I understand that the details can change over time, but some fundamental things should be determined. For example, as I said previously, nobody is taking NATO off the table and nobody will be taking NATO off the table."
Україна не братиме, Україна про це нічого не знала, а Україна розцінює будь-які переговори про Україну без України, які не мають результату, і ми не можемо визнавати будь-які речі або будь-які домовленості про нас без нас, і ми не будемо такі домовленості визнавати. Напевно, там є двосторонній трек України, і вони мають на це, я маю на увазі Сполучені Штати, мають на це право, якщо у них є двосторонні питання, і якщо чесно, вони і до цього про це говорили, тільки тепер стали публічно говорити. Не паперові.